Ladies, and guys, this December from the 17th to the 20th, America Fest is coming to Phoenix, Arizona. It is Turning Point USA's largest event of the year. It's also the biggest conservative event in the movement. So far, Candace Owens, Tim Pool, Tucker Carlson, Allie Beth Stuckey, Charlie Kirk, and Steve Bannon, to name a few, will be there. The list of speakers is stacked. Plus, that doesn't even include the special musical guests who have not been announced yet. Go to amfest.com and use code POPLITICS to get 25% off your tickets. Then go tell your best friend, your mom, your grandpa, your leftist classmate, tell everyone this is a can't miss event and you're going to have serious FOMO if you don't get your tickets today, like right now. In the late 90s, Purdue Pharma looked at states like Maine, West Virginia, and Tennessee and saw them for exactly what they were, an easy target to promote and sell what would eventually become one of the most addictive prescription pain medications to ever exist, OxyContin. West Virginia, for example, made sense as a target demographic for a drug created to reduce pain. The mountain state was filled with blue-collar workers, many doing back-breaking physical labor like mining. Purdue's pharmaceutical sales reps were told to target small-town doctors and convince them to prescribe the drug to their patients. They assured them that OxyContin addiction was almost non-existent, a lie that they paid for big time. Purdue reps told doctors, all of your hardworking patients with debilitating pain from the mines, one dose of OxyContin will relieve pain for 12 hours. They'll have pain relief all day and all night. Except that wasn't true either. When doctors started to hear complaints from patients dealing with chronic pain that the relief on OxyContin lasted only a few hours instead of 12, Purdue reps told doctors, just increase the dose even higher. In fact, they said there was no limit to how high a dose you could prescribe. Some patients reported being written scripts for 400 milligrams a day. What happened next changed American life and culture forever. Hundreds of thousands of people have died in the last 2 decades due to prescribed opioids. And according to the CDC, nearly 20% of all opioid deaths involved heroin in 2020, a drug that many OxyContin addicts graduated to. Now, if you watch my daily show, Poplitics, where I cover pop culture, then you'll remember that last year I gave homework to Cute Service. I said, you have got to watch this Emmy-winning limited series based on the nonfiction book Dopesick by Beth Macy on Hulu. It is based and inspired by real Americans who became victims of the opioid epidemic in one way or another. One of the characters, Dr. Samuel Phoenix, played by Michael Keaton, who won an Emmy for this role, is almost entirely based on the life story of a former opioid abuser and doctor in Johnson City, Tennessee. At one point, this doctor was swallowing and snorting as many as 100 pills a day while prescribing patients the same addictive medication, but eventually he overcame his addiction and went on to become a nationally renowned pain pill and addiction expert. Here in person to share his own story of prescription pain pill addiction, the opioid epidemic, and how Purdue Pharma is responsible for one of the most prolific and horrific true crime cases of all time is Dr. Stephen Loyd, the real-life Dr. Phoenix from Hulu's Dopesick on The Spillover. So you graduated med school, East Tennessee State. Your pill addiction really started towards the end of your residency. Tell us about the day that started it all.
I was probably 6 months out from graduating residency. And, back then, I'm not one of these, walk up a hill both ways to school. But back then we didn't have work hour restrictions and had a lot of responsibility. And so I was depressed, having trouble sleeping, and in all honesty, having trouble with my wife. I had 2 young kids. And so just a lot of things on me. And I was driving home from work and pulled up to a red light right in front of a liquor store in my hometown of Johnson City and reached over and flipped open the glove compartment of my truck. And there were some old Norcos in there, hydrocodone, them as Vicodin. And I remember having this conscious thought that, my patients take these things all the time. And I'm getting ready to step into my dream, all right, things I worked my whole life for. And I picked up that pill, broke it in half, I threw it in my mouth. And about a 10-minute drive home, and suddenly everything was better. All right, my wife was better, my kids were better, my job wasn't as bad. And that was really the start of about a 3.5, almost 4 year downslide that I never saw coming.
And so what was your drug of choice? Was it pills? Was it alcohol?
Yeah. Well, I'd struggled with alcohol earlier in my life. I just never was able to successfully drink. But I'd quit drinking. And so it was pills. It was hydrocodone at first, but really, Alex, whatever was available. And because the thing that I didn't realize is how quickly the tolerance built. So that first time it was a half of a 5 milligram tablet. It was just 2.5 milligrams, but it built so quickly to get that feeling again and again and again. And then it just becomes, it just takes over your life, you know.
And so how were you supplying your habit?
Well, you know, the easiest way was out of people's medicine cabinets. And, you know, I talk about this all the time. Drug take-back programs are successful because of this. But at first, it was just out of people's medicine cabinets. And then I doctor shopped. Like, all my buddies are doctors. And, you know, they look at me.
That's right, because you're in residency, right?
Yeah,
As this addiction is starting. So you know the people.
know a lot of them, right? I had all my friends that, you know, I went to school with, that I was in residency with, other attendings that I'd gotten to be friends with. And so, you know, kind of like the guy that drinks too much is going to go to the same liquor store every time, right? And so I would just hit up different ones at different times. And then, but the biggest supply was out of people's medicine cabinets. And then, you know, something later that was portrayed in Dopesick, which is taking them from patients. And I did all of those.
How long was it till your wife noticed something was up?
Not until the night before I went to treatment.
You're kidding me.
Yeah.
So wait, how many years was that?
It was, you know, 3.5 years.
She did not know that you had been, she just thought something great happened. You were back to yourself or something?
I think it was a little the other way because, you know, at first it is about that energy and it's about that relief that I got. But with time, obviously, things are going downhill. So I was doing great at my job, but I was neglecting my family. We'll come in at night and Karen and the kids will be in the kitchen having dinner and I'd go straight upstairs to my room and close my door, you know. And so she knew something was wrong for a long time. And it's actually something she still struggles with because how could she not know, right? She's my wife. We sleep in the same bed. How's that possible? But no, not until I called her the night that my dad intervened on me. She didn't know what was happening.
How many pills were you taking at the worst period of your addiction?
100 plus a day.
How are you still alive?
I know. Oh, I've thought that so many times. It's what people don't realize about tolerance. And I didn't realize about tolerance. Alex, in medical school, we don't get taught this. Right? You pick it out of a multiple choice exam question and go on. And so it happened to me. And I remember for the longest period of time, I was scared to count how many pills I was taking a day because I knew. I actually had an incident in the ICU one morning that really blew me away because one of the things that people may or may not realize, but when you're taking things like Percocet and Lortab, Vicodin, they all have Tylenol in them. Tylenol will kill your liver. Okay. If you want to damage yourself, that's a good way to do it. And so I knew how much Tylenol I was taking. So we had a lady who had overdosed on Tylenol in the ICU and the resident was reporting on it like they do and, you know, saying what we're going to do with her. We're actually going to life flight her to an academic hospital in Nashville. And I stopped him and I said, Scott, I said, how many did she take? And he told me. And I had to stop what I was doing and dismiss rounds that day because I was taking that much every day. And so I've thought about that. The anecdote for Tylenol is, it's weird, right? So I'm taking all this Vicodin and all this hydrocodone and I'm worried about the Tylenol, right? Yeah. But that's really something legitimately to worry about because it will absolutely kill your liver when you're taking the dosages I was. But the anecdote for that is something called N-acetylcysteine. And they give it to you through an ET tube, you know, when people overdose on it, and you can actually get it at the health food store. It's called Liver Health. And so I went and bought a bunch of it at the health food store just to kind of give you the idea of, you know, where my mind was. And so I would take N-acetylcysteine and then take the pills. That's
incredible. Was there anything that you ever had to do that was outlandish to get pills, or it was always just friends of, you know, that were doctors that were writing you prescriptions?
You know, the outlandish part, you know, I think taking them out of people's medicine cabinets and inventing reasons to take them from patients, this stuff is outlandish. I sat outside of a pharmacy in Orange Beach, Alabama with a loaded gun in my lap and contemplated robbing a pharmacy.
And how many years had you been addicted at that point?
It was towards the end. At the time, I was up to about 100 pills a day, and I had enough for the whole trip because addiction doesn't give you a day off, right? I'm going to the beach for a week. Well, I don't get to stop taking pills for a week. And so we're going to be gone a week, and I need about 700 pills, and I had them. Saved them up and gotten them from different sources at that time. And the problem is that when you have that many, you're going to keep taking them. And I ran out on Thursday and we're there till Sunday. And so I was going to try to find a doctor in the area, and I couldn't find anybody that looked like that's what they did. And so on the way back to the condo, I stopped there.
Can I pause you?
Sure.
When you say you couldn't find someone that looked like that's what they did you mean like a pill pusher type of doctor?
Absolutely, pill mill.
So what would those doctors look like? What do you look for when you're looking for a pill mill?
So I would have looked for a primary care practice, a little bit out of town. I want some out-of-state cars in the parking lot, hoods up, people waiting in line, that kind of thing.
And this is exactly what they depict in Dopesick.
It's exactly what it was. It happened. None of that was made up. That's exactly what I was looking for. And Alex, every single place I went to looked legitimate. And I just didn't feel like there was anywhere that I could go in. And so I drove back and there was the pharmacy. And I'm a country boy, all right? And I got guns and I got loaded guns. Mm-hmm. And so I sat outside that pharmacy and I thought, I could write myself a prescription, but the DEA tracks that and I'd likely get caught. And then I thought, I'll rob this pharmacy. And I sat there in that parking lot and literally I could look across the street and see my kids on the beach. And I had a loaded gun laying in my lap. And for some reason I said, I can't if something goes wrong, and I'm not a criminal, mm-hmm. but I was desperate. And so when you talk about outlandish, that's the lowest point that I got to. But taking them out of people's medicine cabinets and taking them from patients, those things were daily, they were daily occurrences because I thought I would die without it.
Who was it that finally forced you to get help and go to rehab?
My dad. He had seen me for a while. At one point in my life, I weighed up to about 250. And I had lost down to about 178 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And so people don't realize that when you're using drugs like that, the part of your brain that it works on is also the part of your brain that's your drive for food, water, sex, all the things that we need as humans. And it basically just shuts down. So if I had the drug, I was fine. So I didn't need to eat. And so he had seen me. He knew something was wrong. He'd been digging for a while. But my nurses protected me because I don't say this arrogantly. I wasn't a mean guy. I don't throw scalpels. I don't cuss people or anything like that. And so they just all made excuses for me. And my dad couldn't figure it out. And so he finally saw me take a handful of pills. And this is kind of a weird story, but I was dropping Heath off, my son, to go hiking with Dad. And I used to just carry him out in the cup holder of my truck. I didn't care who saw him. And I could have swore Dad and Heath walked off. And so I'm sitting in my truck and I reached over and I grabbed 15 10 milligram Percocets, 150 milligrams, and threw them in my mouth. And when I turned around, my dad was standing right there at the window of my truck. And he said, Steve, did you just take a handful of pain pills? And I told him no.
Right. And he just saw it.
He did.
And so what did he say?
He did. He didn't say anything. He shook his head, told me he loved me, went back and got in the car, took Heath hiking. And the next day when I was coming home from work, I turned the corner and saw my house up on the hill and I saw Dad's truck sitting in my driveway. I knew what he was there for.
An intervention?
It was. He put me in the truck and he said, we're going to go see your sister. And I hadn't talked to my sister in a long time. Our parents went through a divorce when we were adult children. We blamed each other. All that's resolved. But that's how it was. And so I don't want to go see her. And he said, yeah, we're going to see her. And we were driving up the road and he looked over at me and said, Steve, he said, you have a drug problem. I said, no, Dad, I'm just working too much. Or I'm trying to pay back school loans. And all that was true. And I was working a lot, but that wasn't what the problem was. And we went about another mile. And he put his hand over on my left knee, and he said, "Steve, you have a drug problem." And I started crying. I said, "Yeah, Daddy, I do." I said, "I'm going to lose everything I've worked for my whole life. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my wife. I'm going to lose my kids." And he shook his head, and he was crying at that point. And he said, "Well," he said, "none of that stuff's going to do you any good if you're dead." Mm. And Alex, I haven't figured out a retort for that one 18 years later. And so that was really the start of the change. And the weird thing was I had great relief because somebody knew. Mm-hmm. And even talking to you about it right now, I mean, I'm having a reaction that somebody knew, and I didn't have, it wasn't going to be a secret anymore. Had no idea what was going to happen. Had no idea how I was going to get help. I didn't know where I could go, but somebody knew. So that's how it started.
What does a day look like in 30-day rehab? Okay. Like, you wake up in the morning, what happens?
Well, I went to rehab, and when I got there, I mean, I was still using. All right, I lived in Johnson City, which is in eastern Tennessee, in Appalachia, and Nashville is 4 hours west, and so I used the whole way there. And I got there and we walked into the treatment center and they took one look at me and they said, "You're going to need detox." Well, I didn't know what detox was. I mean, I'd heard the word, but I didn't realize it was, so they put me in a car and took me to Vanderbilt University. And I went into the Vanderbilt Institute for Treatment of Addiction. And that's where I started the detox process, 5 days. And Alex, that was a huge event for me. And it's going to wear me out right now. There were 24 kids on my floor. None of them knew I was a doctor. And at the end of those days, I was the only one that got to go to a treatment center. The rest of those kids went back to the street. My neighbor in there, she was in her early 20s, and she had scars up and down her arms from intravenous use, and she was a prostitute in Printer's Alley in Nashville. And I think about her all the time. And the day before I left, she brought me a picture. And she said, "Steve," she said, "this is what I look like clean." And it was her at her junior prom. She's actually from the city I live in now, Mount Juliet. She said, "This is me at my junior prom."
Completely different person.
Those kids all went back to the street. And I got to go somewhere to help me because I was a doctor. And my life really started to change then. I got to see disparities and what people had access to. And I'm grateful for my time at Vita and love the people that helped me there, but I'll never forget the kids. And her in particular, I left her my pillow. My college roommate lived in Nashville and he brought me a real pillow because the pillows in psychiatric hospitals are designed
Terrible.
to be thrown on the floor, whatever happens to them. And he brought me a pillow and I left it for her. And I think about that. So that's really where it started to change. And then I was taken to a place called CPE, the Center for Professional Excellence. And it was a treatment center in Nashville that specialized in treatment of professionals, doctors, lawyers, airline pilots. And a guy named Chip Dodd stepped into my life and changed it.
Why is there something special for people that have that line of work?
Licenses. So we have a professional license. So instead of an insurance company telling you get 15 days, I paid out of pocket. I stayed there until I was better. And I don't think that's what people realize. And so you said something I kind of grinned at a little bit, was a 28-day treatment program. It doesn't exist. Okay. You go in and Alex shows up and they evaluate you and they call your insurance company on your card and they get a prior authorization for you to stay X number of days at that level of care. And you've got to meet that criteria. And as soon as you don't meet that criteria, they want you stepping down. So people with professional licenses, it doesn't work like that. If you need to stay, you need to stay and you pay for it. And so I paid out of pocket for all of it. Insurance, I think, paid $2,000. I was there for 90 days.
Wow.
And it changed my life. I'm grateful for it. But the thing is that people don't have access to that.
Yeah.
And the girl I told you about, I mean, that would have been a pipe dream. That was in 2004. And so my 9 month or my 90 days of treatment cost right at $50,000 cash. Right. It was every dime I had saved. It might as well have been $10 million for her.
Right. And that's what I'm thinking is with how bad the opioid crisis is and how many Americans desperately need this help and just cannot afford it. It's like we're letting down so many of these people and these young people, like what you're describing.
We send them out to die. We send them out to die every day. And I got to where I couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
I still can't. And I think that those 5 days in detox there, probably the most important 5 days of my life, because I started to look at things differently. My neighborhood looked different, and all my friends were doctors, and I meet her, and I meet the other kids I met there, and we had visitation on that Saturday. I got there on Thursday. We had visitation on Saturday. Only 3 of us had people to come see us.
Wow.
My college roommate's wife, Missy, came and she brought me the pillow, and I love her till the day she dies for coming and seeing me there, because she didn't hang her head and she walked in and sat across from me. But only 2 other people had visitors that day. And I just never was able to shake it. It's really shaped my career since that day. This
is just a random thought that popped into my head, but are there organizations, nonprofits or anything that people can volunteer to visit people like that in rehab that have no visitors?
I don't know of any. I love it. It's a great thing.
Because, there are charities where you can go hold drug addicted babies in NICU and stuff.
Right. But the babies are viewed as innocent, and they are.
Wow.
But the moms are not.
That's powerful.
Yeah. And so, it's what we talk about on a daily basis and what we do now. We want to love people unconditionally, demonstrate mercy, and forgive habitually. That's what we do. If you can do those 3 things, you can work with us. If you can't, you can go work somewhere else, and that's fine. But that's what you're talking about. And these are biblical principles.
Mm-hmm.
I've said this numerous times. Tax collectors have gone up in the hierarchy, right? I think if Jesus walked the earth today, that these are the people he'd walk the earth with.
Yeah.
They come out of abusive situations, me included. And they need people to love them. And I think that's where we've got to change our mindset.
Could you describe in detail physically, for people that have never experienced this, what detoxing from pill addiction feels like, looks like?
The worst flu that you've ever had in your life. Because as I told you, right, in med school, we learned these are the withdrawal signs from, amphetamines, or these are withdrawal signs from opioids, right? We pick them out of a multiple choice question. Try living them. And there's so many of them, Alex, but it's the worst flu that you've ever had. So at about 24 hours into it, the sweating, hot, cold intolerance, 1 minute I'm burning up, the next minute I'm freezing to death, goose flesh, issues with your bowels that, you can't even talk about, and bony aches and pains. The worst for me were these tonic jerks, like a muscle spasm. And my first night in full-blown detox, I sweated through 9 T-shirts.
Oh my gosh. And how long does detox last for?
Well, I started getting medicine the second day. I felt a little better, but my detox was about 2 weeks.
2 weeks of that?
Yeah.
And that's why so many people relapse. They're like, I can't even get through it.
Can't take it.
So what do rehab programs provide to help someone get through those nights?
So with opioids, we're lucky because we have medication that helps with that. A drug called buprenorphine does a great job of helping with that. So at about day 2.5, when I got into full-blown withdrawals, I got 9 shots in my left arm over 3 days, and it helped. It didn't alleviate it. The day I got out of the detox unit, July 13th, downtown Nashville. I mean, it's hot in Nashville in July, and not like this, but
not like Phoenix we're recording.
No, I got reintroduced to that last night, but I went to a meeting and I had a sweatshirt on, and so that those last a long time, and so I can't really describe it. These jerks that I would have literally would lift me off my bed into the floor, and I could feel them coming, right? I knew they were coming, and a jerk, and then that. But the people who took care of me were so kind and caring, and then the medication started to help that. But I want you to flip that for a second. You're not at Vanderbilt. You're on the street.
Mm-mm.
What do you do? And I'll tell you what you do is you use.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't think people have an appreciation for, is the desperation of what you would do to not feel like that.
Yeah.
I would have done anything.
And that's what I thought Dopesick depicted so well for someone like me that is so clueless. Yeah. And to me, I was like, this has to be as real as it gets. This seems so realistic. I bet this is exactly what happens. But I mean, you're here. You helped, collab on that show to make sure it was very, very accurate. And so that is exactly what going through drug withdrawal is like.
Perfect.
Or detox.
Perfect. Betsy, right? Betsy sitting up in bed, shaking like that, the waking up and the sweats and the drenched and how desperate she was perfect. I thought Danny Strong and those guys did such a good job with that, because that's exactly what it is. And so instead of being in Vanderbilt and having people around her, Betsy is a camper, right?
Yeah, she's in a homeless encampment.
Absolutely. And this happens, Alex, every single day. It happens where we are in Phoenix right now. It's going on right now. We see people on the street doing it. We don't recognize it because sometimes we just ignore it or we turn a blind eye to it, but it happens every day.
So once you leave 90 days, right, rehab for 90 days, what do you have to change in your life after rehab so that you're not tempted to use again?
The biggest help that I got was dealing with trauma, physical and sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. And the ironic part was I would have never gotten help with any of that had it not been for the addiction. So during that 90 days, we started to get into that. I did something called EMDR, mm-hmm. which is a treatment for trauma. They use it for post-traumatic stress disorder soldiers, but it's also a treatment for physical and sexual violence. And so that started it. And then, I stepped back into my job. Most people that go through this, or a lot of people go through, they lose everything. Alex, I didn't lose anything. The president of my university, Paul Stanton, Medina, my med school, Ron Franks, I want to say their names because I love them so much. They didn't fire me.
Wow.
I got paid every day I was gone. I never missed a paycheck. I would have missed one house payment because I was so bad at money management. My daddy loaned me the money. I paid him back. But
just because you were spending on pills?
Pills, yeah, because I got, eventually got to the point where, you're doing that many, it costs money. And I was just a poor money manager as well, because I didn't think about anything else other than the pills. And so, it's just the desperation that you have. And then that's what I loved about what they did with Dopesick, because she's in that trailer, she's in that camper, she's in a homeless encampment, she's going to her boyfriend, right? So you say, how in the world can you start using heroin? I get it. Pills aren't available. Heroin's cheap. I get it. And I would have for sure done it. I can tell you that for sure. Putting a needle in your arm. How could you do that? Desperation. You're so desperate that you want to feel better, that you think you're going to die, or I thought I was going to die without this thing out here. For me, I just had resources. And then I stepped back out into my regular job. I went back to work. And the only thing I asked for was I hated being alone. And so I asked them to put a doctor with me in my office. And they did. Just
so you wouldn't be tempted, you mean?
The tempted part is a little different, because it's kind of weird. I haven't been. Right, I would have people come in and sit things down in front of me that were my drug of choice. Now, I did
learn.
So then
why did you want a doctor in there with you?
I wanted somebody to be able to talk to.
Oh.
I hated being alone. And they put a doctor there. He was perfect for me. His name was Dr. Brombod, and he, he was there with me every day. He was also a psychiatrist. He did internal medicine and psychiatry. And so I talked to him all day, right? I'd come out with patients and, just have somebody to bounce things off of and not be lonely, because I was so ashamed. I came back. I love to teach. My students were great. I mean, those kids brought me back from the dead. They saved my life. They accepted me back for who I was, and all of them knew where I'd been. And so I really came back into the ideal environment. I didn't miss a beat.
Kind of a weird question, and maybe it's a stereotype of a state like Tennessee, but do you think that the ability of people to forgive you so easily and welcome you back, that you didn't lose work, that your family, everybody stuck around, those kids welcome you back, was it just true Southern hospitality?
I think there's always some of that, and I'm biased though, right? I'm a country boy, so I do think we have Southern hospitality. Here's one. I've got MD after my name. Regardless of everything that happens, I still have that stuff hanging on the wall. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm given breaks because of that when other people aren't. Mm. And I've thought about that a lot. And so for the students who were my students, who continue to be my students, and I still talk to, they accepted me back. They loved me before, they loved me after. And it really renewed my faith in men and women. It really did. The people in my community, I'm not sure. I think part of it is that, and I think that they wanted to see me do well.
Well, patience, clearly, you talk about having patience once you get back. So did you lose patience? Like, were people scared for you to be their doctor after you'd gone through that?
I think we lost 4. And outside of that, how many have I gained?
And what kind of doctor?
I'm an internist. So I'm working in the hospital, seeing patients in the office, in the hospital, ICU, medical step-down units, and I'm on a teaching service. So I'm teaching medical students, medical residents, pharmacy students, pharmacy residents. And so I think we counted that I lost 4, but I don't know how many thousands that we've gained in the last 18 years.
Oh my gosh.
So, and the 4 people that I know for sure left, it was because of the drugs. They just couldn't get by that. But they actually depicted an interaction in Dopesick with one of my patients, and it was one of the ones that the Keaton character, Dr. Phoenix, was splitting pills with. And that's actually a real person. That actually happened. And
to you.
Yeah. And this guy had a problem with his shoulder, but my guy had a problem with arthritis. And so I split drugs with him. And a really eye-opening day for me when I came back was he was in a room. And he was sitting there, and we'll call him Jim. And Jim was sitting there, and I walked in the room, and he was crying. I said, Jim, what's wrong? He said, Dr. Loyd, I'm sorry I got you addicted. Mm. That was a tough day. And I got down in his face and got him to look up at me, and I said, you didn't get me addicted. I said, I used my power advantage over you to get what I needed. And I said, I'm sorry for that. That was a tough day. And I thought they did a good job of depicting. They didn't have exactly that scene, but Keaton took pills from him, right in his office. And it was real subtle, right? If you're not watching closely, you didn't even see it.
Yes. Well, and what's interesting in Dopesick is that the doctor that Michael Keaton plays, you can see simultaneously him himself getting addicted to the pills he's prescribing and the patients getting worse and worse in their addictions.
Yeah.
Because at first, and Dopesick, for those who haven't seen it, is a show about OxyContin and the Purdue Pharma scandal and the Sackler family. So this show is specifically about that pill. But at first, the doctors, everybody, it's so innocent because they're being sold by Purdue Pharma and these reps that it's non-addictive. It's the first opioid of its kind. It's going to change your life. And also the area that you live in also is so interesting because the show takes place in West Virginia, where you have a lot of people managing debilitating pain from mining and all of these very blue collar jobs that require a lot of physical activity. And so when OxyContin was being first kind of distributed, they were targeting these southern areas, these states that have a lot of blue collar workers that are dealing with immense, terrible pain. And so these doctors are getting addicted and the patients.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And, I had Purdue reps in my office telling me about the low addictive potential when I'm addicted to it when they're talking to me. And I knew, and Alex, I knew what I'd do to get it. I mean, I stole from people. I misrepresented myself to colleagues. I knew how desperate I was. And so, watching that over again, it's just amazing because the thing is that you get so desperate that you have to have it. And you've got doctors out there that in medical school and residency didn't learn anything about pain, didn't learn anything about modalities of treating pain, learned very little about the drugs that we prescribe for pain, and certainly nothing about the proper prescribing of it. So who taught them? Who taught them? Purdue Pharma taught them. Absolutely.
Well, I know that. Okay, so when I was in elementary school, that was really the height of everything. So we're talking like 2004 through 2006. I remember going to the doctor at one point. It was the first time and I vividly remember the chart. I was in pain and they showed me that little smiley face where you have the really, really upset face all the way to very happy. And they're like, on a scale of 1 to 10, show which one of these smiley faces is representative of your pain.
Right.
And that was the first time I ever saw it. And then when I was watching Dopesick, they talk about how it was Purdue and all of these pain management places. You can speak on this, but they are the ones who came up with that chart. Yeah. So it was easy for doctors to point at that and say, oh, let's get you on OxyContin now.
Right. And that is, and even pill mills that you see today. I worked a case in Nashville just a couple of weeks ago. Same thing. Oh, I did this, right? I did exactly what I was being told. And to some degree, that's true. So the lie that we were sold was that you're going to prescribe this medication and people's lives are going to get better. So I'm doing that.
Yeah.
I'm prescribing their medication. I'm watching their lives go down the toilet. Pretty soon they don't need they need the long-acting medication, but now they need a short-acting medication for something called breakthrough pain, and then you've got to titrate that up. And the next thing I saw, I got disability papers coming in the mail. My patients weren't going back to work. But when I read review articles or I read articles in journals, they were all telling me my patients were getting better.
But what's crazy is that the people that were writing those journals were paid for by Purdue Pharma to say that it was non-addictive and patients were getting better. The whole thing is so corrupt and insane, which is why when I first watched Dopesick and I learned all this, it was like, this is one of the scariest things. And by the way, I'm a true crime addict. The opioid crisis is one of the biggest true crime stories of our lifetime in American history.
Without question. Without question. And you're looking at that and you see that and you're exactly right. And that's exactly it. When I'm reading an article though, how many times do you think I went over and looked and see who funded it? Never.
No.
It's like the Porter and Jick study. It's not a study. It's a letter to the editor written in 1980. It wasn't a study at all.
Could you explain what that is for those who haven't watched the show?
So when Purdue was marketing OxyContin, they said that it's less than 1% addictive, right? And they based that on something they call the Porter and Jick study. It's in the New England Journal of Medicine. Now, the New England Journal of Medicine and medicine is the Bible, right? Yeah. That is it. That and the British Medical Journal Lancet. Those are your two. So you've got a study that they're referencing in the Bible. How many doctors you think went and looked that up?
None.
None.
They've
of course
just heard,
not.
oh, there's a study that says.
Absolutely. So they parroted back that. It wasn't a study. It was a letter to the editor. And Dr. Jick and his graduate student at the time, Jane Porter, wrote a letter to the New England Journal and said, hey, we had about, 39,000 people in our hospital over this period of time, and 12,000 of them received one narcotic preparation while they were here, and we followed them when they got out, and only 2 of them became addicted. Well, first of all, you're not even comparing apples to apples, right? That's a short-term hospitalization versus long-term pain control. And second of all, it's not a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. You're not looking at people's lives getting better. None of that stuff was true.
And so this whole thing is what Purdue uses to train their sales reps to then go into these small towns to tell doctors, and that all of that is how we got to where we are now in the United States of America with the opioid crisis.
Right. We lost 107,000 people in the United States last year died of a drug overdose. What is that? 294 a day, a 747 going down every 36 hours. Yeah. It's how we got here. And some of the things that have bothered me going forward is if you look, prescribing guidelines, they're good things. There are people who need these medications. There are people who have, and so the pendulum swung too far for them. And so I think we have to be careful about that. But at the same time, Alex, a lot of these same practices are still going on today.
Well, and OxyContin is still available.
Mm-hmm.
There's more restrictions, right? But doctors can still prescribe it.
It's been reformulated too, right? But the other, opioids are dirt cheap, right? Percocet, Lortab, Vicodin, those things have been generic for years. They're dirt cheap. And so,
that's not even really what people want on the streets right now, is it?
Nah. Well, what I see now is all heroin and fentanyl. Yeah. That's all I see.
But you think the heroin explosion is because of OxyContin?
I don't think that there's any question. I don't think that there's any question. I think you can draw a straight line to it, and I've drawn a straight line multiple times to it. But to switch over is easy. It becomes a matter of economics. So in Tennessee, at the height of the pill epidemic, opioids were about $1 a milligram on the street. So we'll translate me 500 milligrams. I'm on 500 milligrams. That's $500 a day. I'm a doctor. I can afford that for a little while, but even that's going to be hard, right? Heroin's dirt cheap. A point is 1/10 of a gram, and a point in Tennessee is, $8-12, and you need 3 points to get through a day.
But deadlier, right?
Oh, absolutely, right. The quality of it, what else is in it, and then now it's all adulterated with fentanyl.
Yeah,
and that's a different ball game. I think that we could see the heroin part coming, right? We restrict pain pills. We drive that down. We don't get these folks access to care. We could see them switch, and I think most people could see that who do what we do. I don't know anybody that saw fentanyl.
Did you really believe, at all at any point, okay, wow, maybe this is the first opioid when it came to OxyContin that is non-addictive?
No, of course not.
So you always were like, something isn't adding up here.
I was addicted to it myself. Of course not. As I said, I had reps in my office tell me about the non-addictive potential of this medication, and I'm addicted to it in front of them. I had another sales rep that was addicted to it. So
what were your interactions like with those Purdue sales reps? Were they doing crazy things like, we'll give you cruise tickets and what they depict in the show? So
no, that part I didn't experience, but I was fresh out of residency, and I wasn't a thought leader, so I never experienced that. But they're bringing stuff into the office. People say, well, you can't change my prescribing habits with a free lunch. Oh yeah, you can. And it's been shown multiple times. And this is the part you don't know about me. So before I went to medical school, I was a pharmaceutical rep.
Oh, really?
I was. So I didn't sell an opioid, but I sold a cholesterol medication. So I knew the sales training. I'd been through that. And so it was interesting to see it from my standpoint, but no, I wasn't one of those guys. So they would go after thought leaders. So Russell Portnoy was one of the people they went after, and he's a thought leader in the United States, got all the Ivy League education. And so they're paying him to go to, seminars to teach other doctors, country doctors from places like Dr. Phoenix is from, how to do this, right? This is pain control. This is easy. You're doing your patients a disservice. What they really need is a long-acting medication, not a short-acting medication. And there's less than a 1% chance they'll become addicted. And this guy's from Harvard. So it's right. It's coming from Harvard, right? And so that's the whole thought process behind it. And it's exactly what happened.
Okay, so we kind of did talk a little bit about the different things that Purdue was lying about, saying how the pills were non-addictive and all this kind of stuff. But for Gen Z listeners who have never, ever heard before about what the Sackler family did in Purdue Pharma, could you give a very summarized version of what they did that was so deceptive and criminal?
So we've known opioids have been addictive forever since, Roman times. We've known it for a long time. In the United States, morphine in the Civil War was so addictive that we named a disease after it of the soldiers who got addicted, called the soldier's disease. We have had multiple heroin epidemics in the United States in the Jazz Age, the early 1970s. We've known opioids have been addictive for a long time. We also know that they have pain control qualities. What the Sacklers did, what the pharmaceutical industry did, was downplay the risk of addiction and overplayed the benefits of the medication when they knew that it wasn't true. And therein was the crime. And so there was a point in Dopesick where Sackler talked about pound the addict, pound the addict, pound the addict. All these people need help. It's these people who are addicted. They're the problem. They're the issue. If it weren't for them, there wouldn't be any problems with this. And that is not true, because it can take someone who was not that person, and with time they become that person, and they undersold the potential of that.
Could you personalize some of the typical addicts that you've met and dealt with who have gotten addicted to pills? What do they look like? Are they all prostitutes on the street?
I wasn't. I wore a white coat. 6 weeks before I went to treatment, our graduating class graduated med school. And in that ceremony, they named me the best teacher in the school. We had 130 plus faculty members. And I used 160 milligrams of OxyContin during the ceremony. Mm. And that's what people don't get. You can get the person who's living underneath the bridge. And one of my gifts that happened to me really early on is I realized the difference in that person living underneath the bridge and me was a sheet of paper hanging on the wall. We had a lot of similarities. And so you don't recognize them. If you're existing in the world today, we're going to leave here and we'll go eat somewhere, or we'll stop at a gas station on the way home. You're going to run across somebody in your life today that has this issue. Guarantee it. Either that are in recovery or that have the issue currently. Mm. And you're not going to be able to tell the difference. You're going to get the person who is what we would call bottom. Right. But there's so many others out there, and we see it all the time. I'm a sports guy. Yeah. We see it in the sports. We see it in the legal profession. We see it with cops. We see it with doctors like myself, lawyers. It's everywhere.
What are some of the worst case scenarios that you have seen in your life of people who get addicted to prescription pills?
It's the progression into higher and higher dosages. And then the switch over or getting a pill off the street that they think is one thing that's really fentanyl. And that's what we were talking about before I got to meet you, is that I didn't see powder fentanyl. I didn't see things like carfentanil, which was made to anesthetize rhinoceroses. I didn't see that one coming. I didn't see clandestine labs in China that make this stuff into powder, and it comes into the United States through Canada and Mexico and pressed into pills that look just like what I'm taking. So I'm not telling you that OxyContin is safe. So if I'm taking 10 milligrams of OxyContin, at least I know that it's OxyContin. Yeah. What if I'm taking it and I don't know what it is and it's really fentanyl? So rather than 1.5 morphine equivalents, so oxycodone is 1.5 morphine equivalents. That means 1 milligram of oxycodone equals 1.5 milligrams of morphine. Oxycodone is actually stronger than morphine. So I take a 10 milligram pill. That's, 10 milligrams, 1.5, that's 15 milligrams of oxycodone. But if it's fentanyl, okay, it's not 15 morphine equivalents. It's 100 to 10,000 morphine equivalents, and one pill kills me. That's the problem.
So here's what I guess I don't understand, just very, I'm just openly being ignorant on this. When it comes to fentanyl, people know that one little tiny speck can kill you. Mm-hmm. Why would drug addicts even want to try taking any, is no one purposely buying it, or are people purposely saying, do you have fentanyl for sale?
Absolutely. There'd be people purposely buying it for sure.
But why do that? Okay. Because you just don't care every time you do it if I die or not?
Yeah. So what I learned is that addiction is not a moral failure. It's actually a brain disorder. And there's two parts of our brain that are really important. One is the reward system, brings us pleasure. And the other is the frontal lobe of our brain, which gives us insight, judgment, and empathy. And so these two things are tugging at each other. So me and you go through our day all day long, every day, and we look at decisions we got to make. And the reward system says, pick the one that brings you the most pleasure. And we'll pick that one, but then we'll look and see what the consequences of that is. And we'll go with the decision that gives us the most amount of pleasure with the least amount of consequences. You and I do it all day long, every day. That's what everybody does. In addiction, what happens is the reward system is hijacked by the drug, and you lose access to the frontal lobe of the brain.
Okay.
Insight, judgment, and empathy are gone, and it's all Steve Loyd sitting outside the pharmacy in Alabama. Same thing, right? There's no way that my frontal lobe tells me this is okay, but my frontal lobe, I don't have access to it because it is separated from a connectivity standpoint from my reward system. So I've lost insight, judgment, and empathy. And I think I've got to have this thing out here or I'm going to die. And this is what I tell people all the time. What would you do to get the thing you thought you would die without? You'll do anything. And I'll guarantee it. And that's what happens in addiction. It's what I never had an appreciation for. And here's the last thing. Your craving for the drug is 10 times stronger than your cravings are for food when you're hungry and water when you're thirsty. And so put all that together and you can easily see it, right? And it becomes very obvious. And so the fentanyl thing is a unique one because it can kill you, but it's no different than me. I'm a trained physician. I had a woman in the ICU who had overdosed and we were getting ready to put her on a helicopter and I'm taking more than she does every day. How come I don't stop using right then? That's why. And I didn't know that. And I didn't have an appreciation for that. Now, the good thing is that the longer we're abstinent, the more our frontal lobe comes back online and I don't do those things anymore. I would never do that because it could kill me. But then it didn't matter. I was controlled solely by my reward system, which is what you see in people with addiction.
Well, and so the other thing with fentanyl is all these accidental deaths are happening because you have not skilled chemists, or I don't know what the term is, but you have people that are mixing drugs. Okay, I got to mix up my fentanyl for the people that want to buy fentanyl, but then I also got to mix up cocaine or whatever for the people that want to buy cocaine, right? And so correct me if I'm wrong, but what's happening is a teeny speck of fentanyl is accidentally getting into cocaine batches and other drugs. People are snorting cocaine thinking I'm just trying to have fun at this party, and then they're dying. First time ever maybe taking a bump.
Right, absolutely. And so I'm sure some of that cross-contamination can happen, but most of the time it's intentional.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And I'm not familiar with Arizona. I'm very familiar with the South.
Yeah.
And in Tennessee, almost everything is adulterated with fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, just like you said. And it's intentional. It's intentionally put in there. First of all, fentanyl is dirt cheap. I mean, really cheap. So you can
like now or years ago?
Oh, right now. It's cheap today.
Really? Even though it's like this crazy drug, I would think it would be so expensive.
Dirt cheap even today. And so, you've got heroin, you cut it with fentanyl, you're making it more potent, and the person who is addicted, they want that next thing, right?
Do you think that drug dealers should get the death penalty? Hot take.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. The death penalty, probably not. In all honesty, I guess I can't kill anybody. So that it just is what it is. The truth is they don't know what's in it. A lot of times it's coming from somewhere else. And so, do they need to be prosecuted? Yes. Death penalty, I don't think so. But I would probably say that, Alex, in all honesty about everything, it just is what it is. But they do have a responsibility whenever you're selling something, and there are consequences for that. And I tell people all the time, I learned most of what I know about illicit drugs from dope dealers. That's where I got my education. And they get into recovery and they teach me these things. So they will intentionally put fentanyl in some of these other things like cocaine, like methamphetamine. Why? If you stop taking cocaine or you stop taking methamphetamine, you don't get sick. You don't go through that dope sickness, right? They don't cause dependence. If you mix fentanyl in there and you do it long enough, now you're dependent. Now you got to come back to the dope man quicker because you need the heroin or you need the cocaine or the methamphetamine because it's got fentanyl in it and that's what's making you sick. So there's actually some good books out there on that. I'd encourage you to look at them in the mainstream media that talk about that very process. And they actually mix it in blenders, like a bullet blender you got in your kitchen. So you're exactly right. They're not exactly chemists, and they're just putting drugs together. And so, yeah, they need to be held accountable.
Could you tell us about the girl who ended up in Vegas? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Tess. Yeah, that's Tess is kind of the character that flows throughout Best Book, Dopesick, which is what the series was based on. But you watch Tess, and Tess is a sad character from the very start. She has the risk factor. She's got the family history. She's got the trauma. She's been in and out of abusive relationships. She's got a little girl. Right, that's the other thing that we forget. You see somebody out there who's struggling with this, there's a pretty good chance that there's somebody in their life that's their kid. And so I don't think we can forget that. But Tess had been in and out of rehabs multiple times. Her granddaddy had spent God knows how many thousands of dollars trying to get her help. And she would do well for a period of time and everybody think, oh, she's made it. And then she would relapse. And that's what people don't understand is the cravings are lifelong. I still have cravings myself, right? And I'm 18 years in recovery. I still have them myself, but I have tools that I use and I don't use. I'm not going to use today and I'm not going to use tonight, even though I'm here by myself. It's not going to happen. And so she never got to that point. And Tess wound up, partially skinned in a dumpster wrapped in cellophane.
So what do you mean she ended up partially skinned?
Right, so her skin had been like somebody had taken,
why would they do that? Like it was a serial killer?
Getting involved with that element that evidently she got involved with in Las Vegas. I think that's where she was found. It was definitely at West, and I'm pretty sure it was Vegas. But you get, and I know about some of my work, but I work with drug dependent pregnant women, and they get into trafficking situations. Right. And almost all of them, Alex, come out of sexually abusive situations, things my Sunday school class don't want to know about. Yep. And I didn't know about. And so they get in these situations where they have to have money for their drug and they do what they need to do. And I don't know that's what happened with Tess. I just know that's where she wound up. And for those of you who haven't read the book, I'm sorry to spoil the ending for you, but it's a dramatic thing because Tess has a little girl. Tess also has a mother and a sister. I worked with her sister, and I've met her mother. Her mother's a nurse. And so you look at Tess's story, and it's incredibly sad. And I believe that she wanted recovery. I believe that the system is not set up to help most people get there.
How should the system be set up to help these people?
So I'm convinced that a big driver in people's lives who are in recovery is getting help with trauma, childhood trauma, adverse childhood experiences. And Alex, I'm not blaming mom and dad here. I'm just looking at it is what it is. And most people don't have the resources to get help with that. I got the best help in the world. I had the best people in the world helping me with physical and sexual abuse that I thought I'd take to my grave. And now I can talk about it with you. Most people don't have that. And so the system is not set up for that. It's set up for short bursts, and then you either make it or you don't. And you don't get to those underlying drivers that put you where you are. And I don't think that we're going to get to where we all want to be until we acknowledge that and until we start to help people with that on a deeper level than we are right now, because I don't think we are.
Percentage-wise, realistically and fairly, how much of the opioid pandemic do you think can be blamed on Purdue Pharma?
Well, addiction is about genetics, trauma, and opportunity. So I look at it as the 3 7s on a slot machine. Those 3 7s hit, that's when the money comes out the bottom. So genetics, mom and dad, sperm and egg, right? Trauma, childhood stuff, and sometimes adult stuff, but can't really, those two things are fairly constant. What's not constant is opportunity. What Purdue did was increase the opportunity greatly. So I explain, when I'm teaching it to folks, I always tell them this: what's the most widely available, socially acceptable things people struggle with? Alcohol. You and I can buy it within 10 minutes of where we're sitting right now. We're both of age and we have an ID and we have money, right? So it's widely available, socially acceptable, and it is by far the biggest thing that people have trouble with. What Purdue did was increase that third 7. They increased the social acceptedness of, hey, this is okay. A doctor wrote it, right? And it's safe. Low chance of addiction. I'm doing what my doctor said. I'm not addicted. I'm not having issues. My doctor wrote this. So Purdue was responsible for starting that part. Now, other companies jumped on board later, and we can go on all day about that, but they're the ones who started it.
What did small towns in America see as OxyContin was getting more widely prescribed? Could you describe how crime changed and American life changed in these small towns? So
my home state of Tennessee was third in the United States in property crime driven by substance use. Third in the whole United States. And I was starting to think Vermont, I think, was first, because when this got started, it started up the Appalachian train. Even Vermont didn't have to do with the North and South thing. It had to do with Appalachia. But I think that's what we saw change. I mean, you get desperate. Alex, I stole from my dad. I'm a doctor. I have a 6-figure income. I stole from my own family, my own parents, right? And so it gets so expensive that you do what you need to do to get the thing that you're going to die without. And so property crime goes up, right? Petty theft, whatever it is. So if you look at our incarcerated population in the United States right now, how many of them in there are for nonviolent drug offenses? And, and this isn't a red or blue thing.
Yeah.
This is like First of all, it's expensive, right? It's expensive all the way around. So how much of that is driven by nonviolent drug offenses? And it's a lot. So yes, I don't think there's any question. And if you look at the incarceration rate in the United States, I mean, just mirror it from 1995 till now.
How did the Purdue Pharma stuff end, or has it ended? Were they ever held legally responsible?
Well, yeah, they've been held. It depends on what you mean by legal. Me, I want criminal.
Yeah.
Right. So
I guess that's what what I want to know. And for people that have never heard the story.
Right. So you're a true crime buff, right?
Yeah.
That's what who've killed more people than that? Who is it? Not Jeffrey Dahmer, not John Wayne Gacy, right? How many people have died as a result of this? Yet nobody's been to jail. Okay. So there's a difference. I mean, hitting them in the pocketbook's one thing. I don't want to hear about your economic woes because you only have 3 houses in the Hamptons as opposed to 5. And so, yes, have they been held legally responsible? That process is still ongoing. So the answer to that is yes. Had they been held criminally responsible? No.
The clean needle program or whatever the government is doing, supplying people with clean needles to use and stuff, is that helping or hurting?
So you're looking at harm reduction now. And so there are schools of thought out there that says, oh, you're encouraging use because you're offering clean needles. And I guess that's one way to look at it. I'm a harm reductionist and I didn't used to be, but I've been doing this a while. And I can tell you that we can lower rates of hepatitis C and HIV by providing, clean needles and clean syringes. You can absolutely do that. Are you encouraging drug use? I don't think so, because I think they're going to use anyway. But I certainly respect people's opinions on the other side of that. For me, it's about keeping people alive. Alex, I just believe in the sanctity of life. I can't get by that. And I can't watch kids die anymore. And so if there's anything out there that gives us a chance, because in all of my training in medicine, I've never figured out how to work with dead people.
Yeah.
And so anything that's going to decrease their chance of dying, I'm going to support. And I certainly understand the other side of that of saying you're condoning the use. I don't condone the use at all. I want you to get into recovery. And I think it's an interesting subject that we need to look at and make sure that it's having its intended purpose. And if it's not, then we need to change streams.
Tell us about how you ended up getting in contact with producers from Dopesick, and were you really amped and like, this is the coolest thing in my life? Michael Keaton's gonna play me, basically?
I wished it was like that. It really was. First of all, Beth and I were friends, and
author of Dopesick,
right? So
because the show is based on a book with the same name.
Yeah. So Beth and I had met, and we became friends, and we're friends today. And so Beth tells me that, hey, we're going to do a Hulu series of the book, and which I thought was great. I thought it was great for Beth because I love the way she writes, and the platform that she can give this is a massive, right? And so and it goes on. I don't think anything about it. And so Beth's always emailing me or texting me, hey, Steve, is this possible? Is this possible? And I'll email her, text her back.
Like, when you say, is this possible? Like, is this realistic, a scenario?
Absolutely. So she says, when we're doing this show, do you mind if I reach out to you and you just tell us? Because they wanted to give their main character, and I didn't know it was going to be Keaton. I knew it was going to be a doctor. I knew it was going to be in West Virginia. I didn't know it was going to be Keaton. And so they said, we're going to give him his own drug problem. And I thought, okay, that's pretty cool, and I can help you with those scenarios. So every one that they sent me or texted me, I was like, no, that wouldn't happen that way because this, and this. And finally, Danny Strong, Danny said, why don't we just use yours? And I was like, okay, well, that sounds fine with me. We can use that. And so I met with him. It was over Zoom. It was during the pandemic, so everybody was, miles apart and all that. So we met, and I told him stories. And then, in all honesty, I forgot about it. I mean, seriously, because that's there.
Yeah.
I'm treating my patients. I'm in jails.
You're living life.
Yes, right. I'm going through my life. And then Beth called me up and says, we got it. It's all ready to go. And she told me about the premiere. Well, the premiere was in her hometown. She's from Roanoke, Virginia. And I was having oral surgery and I couldn't go.
Oh, no.
So I didn't think anything at all about it. I told Beth, I'm sorry, I can't come. I really wish that I could, obviously, but I couldn't. I mean, I had this scheduled and I didn't want to miss it. And so the next day I came into work, and my son-in-law works with me, Sterling. And Sterling said, hey, Steve, are you in trouble? I looked around. I said, no, why? He said, because your LinkedIn page last night got like 2,700 hits or something crazy.
Holy
right?
crap.
So it was a bunch of hits. And I said, then I got worried. Maybe I was in trouble because I'd forgotten about the premiere. And so at the press conference, Beth had told them that the Keaton character was based on me and another physician, Art Van Zee. And so people had started to look me up and search me. So that part was cool because I didn't think anybody, in all honesty, I thought when we did it that nobody would ever know, which is fine. I didn't have an issue with that. I can tell you that I've liked it. And this is a reason. I wouldn't be sitting here with you today with our target audience, and I know who our target audience is, without that. And so now we have an opportunity to reach these young conservative women. Mm-hmm. And there may be some of them that are struggling with this. Yep. And they don't want anybody to know.
So true.
Yep. It never would have happened without that. So why did I fly to Phoenix? Because I was that guy. I was that guy in my 20s that didn't know there was anybody who could help me. So I'll guarantee you there'll be a listener of this show that's sitting there right now thinking there's no way out. And they'll hear this and realize there may be a way out. And that's why it's a good thing. So I've enjoyed that part of it. Some of the stuff that they did in the series that I didn't do.
What was or wasn't true in the Michael Keaton character for you?
So we've already talked about this before we met you. So one, I never bought a school bus.
Okay.
Karen would have shot me. In retrospect, it was a good idea because I love it. I've taken many people to treatment. So I never bought a school bus and I didn't relapse. I will tell you a funny story. So I didn't tell my mom
that the show was coming out, or what?
I didn't tell her anything about it. She lives in the Tri-Cities. Don't see her that much, and I just didn't tell her anything about it. So she watched the show, and I was home at Thanksgiving last year, and she goes, "Hey, Steve, have you seen the show Dopesick?"
No way.
And I said, "Yeah, I've seen it." She goes, "That guy reminds me of you."
Oh my gosh, were you like, funny story, Bob?
I swear that's the truth. And I laughed about it because it is. And so I like that. And the thing I like most about what they did, because I watched it just like everybody else. And there were two things that struck me. One is I didn't know the impact it would have on my wife.
In a good way or a bad way?
A hard way for her to watch it. Because the things that you saw him, the pill bottles, remember him pulling it? Yeah. That all happened. The patient I told you about, the taking drugs from him, the botched surgery, that happened. And I have talked about that for a long time. I can't say I've made peace with it, but it is part of who made me what I am today. Mm-hmm. And watching Karen watch that was difficult.
So did you guys choose to watch the show separately or together?
We watched it separately.
Yeah.
We watched it separately.
Were you crying watching it? Emotionally, what was it like to see your life story play out?
Emotionally, it was like that. There were times the thing that got me the most was the day that he pulled the drawer out and all those pill bottles were in there, because I remember that day.
In his doctor's office.
Yeah. And I remember that because I kept it locked. I didn't want anybody finding them. I remember looking in there and there were literally hundreds of bottles. And I remember thinking, I took all those. And I remember the desperation of that day and how I felt inside. So that part was very difficult for me. The botched surgery part was difficult for me. He got arrested right after that. I didn't get arrested. I had a surgeon buddy that I looked out in the parking lot and saw his car and got on the phone with him. I would have never done that. I wouldn't do that today, Alex. But those things really happened, and they were hard on me, but they were really hard on Karen. And I didn't have an appreciation for that. And if she'll listen to this, so honey, I'm sorry about that. I was just thinking to myself.
Well, obviously, sitting here listening and everyone else listening to this interview, they're thinking, oh my gosh, he's such an incredible, inspiring, strong man. But I think you would also, I'm sure, admit yourself that it was Karen and having such an amazing, supportive, strong wife, which is that played a huge part in you being able to be here and doing this now, right?
No way I'm here otherwise. I learned this principle from a business book I read years ago, and I've really tried to live my life like this. When I have problems, I look in the mirror. When I have success, I look out the window. And Karen is that window. Karen, my best friend, Darren, the people I had in my life, I've already told you about my dean and Chip and all those folks, they're the reason I am where I am. I wouldn't be here without them. And so people who are struggling to get into recovery, it's all about that network. It's about all the things we talk about in church. All right. Mm-hmm. We talk about it all the time. Nobody will do it in church though, because they don't want anybody to know. And I say that in generalities. I'm sure there are people out there, but being real.
Yeah.
Being able to walk like nobody comes into their Sunday school class and go, hey, my kid's struggling with dope. Right? They'll talk about selling a piece of property or, I'm struggling in this. But when we learn to get real like this, because I almost can't tolerate relationships that are not this. Like this interview today with you, this is real stuff.
Yeah.
And I love this. If this was superficial, I'd have been checked out a long time ago. I can't deal with
same.
it. Right.
That was my whole goal of this podcast. I was like, this has to be different than any other show out there. It's got to be real, just even hard to listen to sometimes, captivating true stories that people go through.
If it doesn't move me inside, I'm not interested. And I never was like that. And really, the other thing that I really loved was how they finished the show. In the very last scene, Keaton walks in.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, this is definitely a spoiler alert. But for me, it was so perfect, and because I didn't know. I mean, I watched it just like everybody else did. And Keaton walks into basically a 12-step group, and he does what you and I are doing here today. He cracked himself up, and he started talking about pain, and he started talking about, the importance of community and relationship. And so the opposite of addiction is not recovery. And I'd love this line to be mine, but it's not. The opposite of addiction is community and relationship. And that's what we're talking about. And so medication helps, right? It does. And it saves people's lives, and syringe exchange programs decreases the chances of this or that. Doesn't cure it. What'll be the end result of this when we come out on the other side is community and relationship. And I think it's part of what this show will do. And it's what you're trying to do with your listeners. You're trying to build that relationship. And I'm a relationship guy, and I love this. And that's the way the series ends. So those were the parts of the show that really moved me. And then of course, Betsy and
Betsy's another character on the show.
Betsy getting input about what she needed from people who had no medical training wore me out. I'll do whatever it takes to keep Betsy alive. And I know you asked me the question about syringe exchange, or you asked me the question about needle exchange, or this or that. I'd do whatever it takes to keep her alive. I don't give a crap. I don't. And because I believe that if we keep people alive and we keep showing them this community, this relationship, this acceptance, that we can save a lot more lives than we can otherwise.
So let's talk about now, okay, I am abusing pills, I'm addicted to drugs, or I know someone, I love someone who is addicted to drugs or pills. What are the signs to look for if someone is abusing pills?
So this is my best one, and it's easy. If you look at someone and you say they're not the same person they used to be, you got to ask yourself a question. That's it. Hey, this is not the same person I used to know. I at least have to ask myself the question at that point. Is there something going on here that I don't know? And there may not be. And you've got to be brave. So I'm a huge Brene Brown fan. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, and I love it. You got to be willing to crack yourself open a little bit. My friend Alex may have a problem. She's not the same person that I used to know. And I'm looking at her and I'm seeing changes. Can I go to her and say, hey, Alex, I love you. I see some things I'm worried about. What's going on in your life? Because a lot of people say that they want to do that, but they don't want to sit down and do what I'm doing to you right now. And so we've got to be willing to step into that in a way that does that. So when I see that now, I'm never afraid of it. If you put my information out there on this podcast, you say, hey, here's Steve's contact information. You can't believe the phone calls I'm going to get. It's going to be a lot. And I get excited about every one of them. And they're going to be panicking. My kid's doing this. My kid's doing that. My life's falling apart. The other thing is addiction is a family disease. My husband and I are struggling, right? And they're always shocked when I start asking those questions because I know they don't want to tell me. But I get excited. Like I'm excited right now. I get excited about it because I know what can happen. I know what can happen.
For good. Their life can change.
Heck yes. You've got a situation here that looks like there's absolutely no hope in. And your kid's going down this route, or you're going down this route, or your spouse don't know, right? Doesn't know. I love that because I know what can happen if we allow ourselves to get vulnerable and get real for a little while. And I really can't tolerate anything else.
Yeah. So how do we reverse course in America when it comes to the opioid epidemic? Is there certain things that we need to be doing, that we need to be voting for, that will help this? Is it just community and relationships like you talked about? Well,
I think community and relationship is the overall big answer. And the good thing is this is not a red-blue thing. This is everybody. And there's been contributors from both sides
of course
to this. And so what I believe in doing is throwing all that stuff aside anyway. Pointing blame never helps. People need to be held accountable, and I think we're going down that route. I think we've made some changes educationally that are good. But the one thing that everybody can do that's free, it just doesn't cost any money, and you don't need a grant or a government program. You can change the way you look at it and realize that this is about meeting people where they are and looking at addiction a little bit differently. And that's where I really changed my mind on this stuff, Alex. I always looked at addiction as just a moral failure. You're where you are because you did this or did that, and you deserve it. And there's still some of that. There's choices that are made. But now I look at it as an opportunity to step into somebody's life and help them. And they're going to fail. There's going to be a lot of them fail. And so when they get back up, I want to be there standing there, offer them a hand. And all those things are biblical, every one of them. Right. And so I would encourage our listeners to take that approach. Here's the side effect of that. I feel better about myself. I'm not perfect, but I like the guy I see in the mirror now. And we talk about Ted Lasso, right? Be curious, not judgmental. And that's okay. But it's scary. It's scary for me to sit down here and say, Alex, tell me what's going on, because I see things and I want to make sure that you don't need help. So and that's a hard thing to do.
What are the steps? Like, give us some bullet point steps, like do these 3 things if you're struggling or someone you know is struggling, besides the asking them what's going on and see a change.
Right. So if you're struggling yourself, the number one thing that I can tell you is don't stay in it alone. I told myself all kinds of stories about how I could get out of it, and all of them ended in the same place. So if you're struggling out there and you're listening to this right now, and your significant other doesn't know, or you're living in the shadows, reach out. There's a lot of places you can reach out. You have a Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse in Arizona here, or wherever. Heck, we're all across the country. So every state has that, and there are numbers that you can call for that. If you're faith-based in your church, reach out to somebody in your church, but go in and be real and tell them the truth. So if you're struggling yourself, that's the number one thing I can tell you. Because until you're willing to do that, you're going to struggle. And I will tell you this, there's life on the other side. I get to live it. I'm living it with you today. If there's somebody in your life that's struggling, love them enough to sit down and talk with them and ask them the same questions that I just asked Alex. And there are people out there that can help you as well. There are state agencies, there are nonprofits all around. There are 12-step support groups or Celebrate Recovery groups all across the country that will be willing to help you. And if all else fails, Google me. I'm pretty out there, and I will give you direction. But I can tell you that as long as we isolate ourselves, we're going to continue to struggle, both from a family perspective and an individual perspective.
Last question. Will America ever be the same since the creation of OxyContin?
No, it won't. And I say that because how do you get over your kid dying of an overdose? I got a group of women in Williamson County, Tennessee, most affluent county in the state. And they all lost their kids to drug overdoses. They won't ever be the same. It won't be the same. Too many families have been destroyed. Too many lives have been destroyed. And so when you're watching Dopesick and you see the reaction of people like the Sacklers, you have to put that where it is, because they're laughing. These folks are not disposable. A lot of them are in rural Appalachia, rural communities, and now they're everywhere. That's where they started. So no, we won't ever be the same. But with that said, I'm the eternal optimist. And I think that we can make something good out of it. And the first good is that we don't let it happen again.
What contact information to get a hold of you, follow you on social media, whatever you have out there that you are willing to share, could you give us?
Yeah. Oh, anything. You guys will put this out, how you put it out, and you're welcome to put that in there, because I will do my level best to help you or guide you. But this just happened. I had an intern from Auburn helping me this summer, so I now have all kinds of social media accounts, and I've started making TikTok videos.
No way! You're on TikTok?
Yes, but I'm not dancing, and I'm not crushing an egg on my head. But I needed to. I want to reach out to the population of people, that, patients that I'm targeting, and my target audience is women of childbearing age.
Oh, well, that's us. Yeah, Geez, I didn't even realize that, Dr. Loyd. So this is like the perfect podcast for you to go on.
It really is. And I didn't realize that about you until I started reading about you. But yeah, that's the target. So I wanted to be able to teach them things about addiction and about, having babies that were born dependent and all that stuff. And I wanted to do it in 45 seconds to a minute. So we've been filming them all summer, and they're not anything fancy. I don't have a stage or anything like that.
You don't need that for TikTok.
No.
They just want real good content and information.
Oh, this is real. And we teach them about addiction. So I'll give you guys my social media stuff. But if you're looking for me, basically you can put Dr. Stephen Loyd. It's Stephen, and then my last name is Loyd, 1 L Oyd, and basically across any platform, and you'll find me.
Perfect. And we'll put all of his contact information and website and all that good stuff in the description as well. This has been by far just such a memorable episode for me, and something I've been so excited for. I told you the journey of trying to find somebody that I felt like could give a personal and also expert opinion and analysis on the opioid crisis. And I just absolutely adore you. I wish I could meet your whole family and hug your wife and everything. I just feel like now from this conversation, I know you like you're your old friend. And so those are the best types of guests to have. So thank you so much for coming on The Spillover.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Real talk, this man has the Holy Spirit in him. When you talk about a redemption story and being in the darkest pits of hell and then surviving and thriving and changing your life entirely, the only explanation for surviving what Dr. Stephen Loyd did is Jesus. This is just a fact. I meet so many unique people for this show. Most of the guests I have on, tell these crazy stories, and sometimes it's a story they've told hundreds of thousands of times before. So I really appreciate, as an interviewer, the way Dr. Loyd told his story like it was the first time he's ever talked about it. He was just so well-spoken. He had such a wide range of emotions. Like, he was entirely emotionally present. He was educational. He was entertaining. He brought it in every sense of the word. So to me, this was a 10 out of 10 interview. I couldn't have asked for a better interviewee on the subject. Plus, I love true crime, and the opioid crisis is something that I touched on briefly over this summer with my Alex Meyer interview about Big Pharma, but that episode was really more about vaccines. It wasn't necessarily about Purdue and the opioid crisis. This crisis is one of the scariest stories in American history because you have Purdue Pharma operating as the pinnacle of greed. People think, pharmaceutical companies, they care about us. They want people to get better, to get healthy. It is unfathomable to me that these people sat in meetings and knew that everyday Americans were dying, and they kept saying, up the dosage. They were killing people just to make more money. And I've had these survivor stories on the show. We've heard sadistic serial killer survivor stories, but in my view, Purdue Pharma was also a sadistic serial killer. The pleasure that they got from thousands of people dropping like flies all over the US was all because of money, and they just kept going. They just kept killing. And I think that counts as them being a serial killer. You have to let me know if you do too. And while you're at it, leave a full-blown 5-star review, because this episode is top tier and Dr. Stephen Loyd was a fabulous guest. If this is the last podcast I ever do, it will be my favorite one. If you or someone you know is struggling with pill addiction, you can call a substance abuse helpline at 1-800-662-4357. The Spillover is back next Thursday at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can watch every interview of The Spillover on the Politics YouTube channel or on Rumble. Next week, look forward to hearing from one of the most popular women in the Christian influencer space. You love her. She's hilarious. It's high energy. It's fun. It's juicy. Really good tea spill. I'm Alex Clark, and this is The Spillover. Love you. Mean it. Bye.